What is up, Goifs and Gooners? We are here doing something a little bit different on the channel. I've been seeing a lot of different opinions from the new set, Tarkir Dragonstorm, mainly by a lot of people who I see play primarily one format. We don't need to really mention it, but I'd like to do something that I'm calling an honest set review of Tarkir Dragonstorm as someone who plays multiple formats, and my qualification being this single top 8 pin here that I've earned a few times. So without further ado, let's get into the white cards of Tarkir Dragonstorm. First, we have Onofenza, Unyielding Lineage. I think this card is actually pretty sweet. I think it's definitely going to be a great bomb in limited, and still deciding whether it can see some constructed play in standard. It being flash and having first strike is definitely pretty awesome. I like this in a white weenie style deck because you can definitely make a bad block here where you block with 4 1/1s against like a 4/4 creature and then flash in on Offenza and then turn all of those creatures into 2 1/1 creatures. I think it's a pretty sweet surprise play you can play on your opponent. I think it's a very tempo style card, and I'm hoping that this can kind of bring white weenies back into standard a little bit. Next up, we have Arashan Sunshield, which is a 3 and a white 3/4 human warrior creature. When this creature enters, exile up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard, and then it has pay a white, tap to tap target creature. I think this is going to be definitely bulk. I think going wider and getting damage through is usually better than playing a card like this that's going to just stop one of their best blockers. Something like this can work in more of like a mid-range style deck. However, it's pretty overcosted to have something that does a little bit of a board stall. That's kind of what this card does. It definitely wants the game to go a little bit longer. It's not that aggressive, and I don't really see where this warrior lines up with like an aggressive Mardu strategy. So I'm kind of giving this one like a D for sure. And now we have Bearer of Glory, 1 and a white, a 2/1. During your turn, this creature has first strike, and it has 4 and a white. Creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So this is a card I put definitely higher than Arashan Sunshield. This card is definitely going to give you some early damage attacks, and then even if you draw this late in the game, you can kind of boost your creatures for like some lethal damage. It definitely lends itself to a go wide strategy. You want to make as many mobilized 1/1s spirits as you can, and then activate this ability. Hopefully you can activate it once, maybe twice, but this thing helps break board stalls, and if you're wide enough, this can turn 3 damage into 6 damage and vice versa, and hopefully lets you claw past the finish line. Okay, we have another rare. We have Clarion Conqueror, 2 and a white for a 3/3 flying dragon. Activated abilities of artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers can't be activated. So this is giving me sort of a sideboard-esque card. I think in limited you definitely play it just to get a 3 mana 3/3 flyer is above the vanilla test rate. Typically something like this traditionally costs about 4 mana. So if you see this in your limited or in your pre-release pool, you're probably going to want to play it. However, the text of the activated abilities of artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers will most likely not be as relative in limited, but you'll have incidental upside, so that's good. I don't think this card does enough for constructed. The fact that it doesn't have an ETB makes it really hard to play this in like a standard deck. That's why I could say this would be relegated to more of a sideboard card. However, there aren't too many decks that really get turned off by this card because it's activated abilities and not triggered abilities. Next up, we have Coordinated Maneuver, a 1 and a white instant speed spell with 2 modes. It has choose one. Coordinated Maneuver deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to target creature or planeswalker, and the second mode being destroy target enchantment. It's nice to have 2 modes for this spell. Anything that is flexible is definitely going to give you a bonus. I would give this a solid C+, C-ish range in limited. Again, in constructed, I think this card is not going to be as good as a card like Destroy Evil. I think this kind of, it asks too much for you to build a board up when most decks are prepared to deal with answering a board in standard. Next, we have Dalkovan Packbeast, 2 and a white, Vigilance 0/4 Ox that has Mobilize 3. So I think this is going to be pretty good in limited, but not really going to show up in any other format. Because the way you have to think about this spell is it's really a 3/4 Vigilance for 3, so it passes the vanilla test. And then there's a lot of upside in Mardu for having some type of sacrifice synergy, or whenever your creatures die, there are some cards that have ping effects. So to deal 3 damage with creatures, you might get 1 or 2 damage in. Your opponent might get a free block. However, if you have those Mardu synergies, this might just be 3 damage every turn. So I think this is going to be a build around B in limited for sure. Alright, Descendant of Storms. For 1 mana, it's a Savannah Lions. Whenever this creature attacks, you may pay 1 and a white. If you do, it endures 1. And endures 1 is either putting a +1/+1 counter on this card or making a 1/1 spirit token. So I think this is great in both Mardu and Abzan. It's going to grow taller if you need it to. So On turn 2, if you don't have any mana spend, you can either make it a 3/2 or make another 1/1. So if you're in the Mardu wedge, you're going to want to make the 1/1 and hopefully use a card like we saw before that has Anthem effects to help get you across the finish line. And if you're in Abzan and you have some +1/+1 matter synergies, then you'd go ahead and put this on here. I think this is a nice flexible card. It's well statted, and I doubt there's going to be a better one drop in the format for those strategies. This was definitely something you're going to pick up pretty quickly on draft. However, I don't think this kind of beats out the cards that we currently see in constructed formats that will give you +1/+1 counters at the beginning of combat, whether it's Luminarch Aspirant or the one in Wilds of Eldraine that can give you the, I forget which enchantment it gives you, which role token it gives you, but I don't think this is going to be that playable in standard. Next, we have Dragonback Lancer, a 3/1 white, 3/3 with flying that has mobilize 1. So this is definitely going to be a filler card, but it's good. You're never going to mind playing this in your limited deck as your 22nd or 23rd card. So being able to hit 3 in the air and just make another 1/1 token that's attacking, it's all right. A lot of the time, I predict in most board states, the mobilize 1 is not going to be relevant here. Obviously, if you had something like Endure 1, this card would be way better and probably be uncommon at that point. But I think pretty, kind of like a C-D card and not going to see much constructed play. Alright, Duty Beyond Death, 1 white instant speed. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Okay, so again, gonna be nice with the go wide strategies because you get to trade 1 damage. You're probably trading a spirit token, sacrificing it to this so that all your creatures survive that turn and then get +1/+1 counters. This card is going to be even better with creatures that have vigilance because then you won't be as worried about dying on the crackback. So this is going to be a solid playable for sure. When you play a deck like this, you just can't be making bad blocks at all because every single creature is going to count by the end of it. So if you're playing a card like this, you have to be mindful that each little creature is a resource that you need to win the game. Okay, up next we have a house. We have Elspeth Stormslayer, 3 white, 5 loyalty. If 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many tokens are created instead. This is already one of the more amazing static abilities we've seen on a Planeswalker. The +1 is to create a 1/1 white creature soldier token, which is going to turn to 2 because of static effect. And then the 0 ability is to give a +1/+1 counter to all the creatures you control, and they gain flying until your next turn. So this thing is going to be insane. Well, I just realized it's until your next turn. So if you're about to die to a flyer, this is going to save you, which is sweet if you don't want to get aggressive with it. And then its -3 ability is to destroy target creature opponent controls with mana value 3 or greater. This thing is definitely an A+. It kind of does everything. It protects itself 2 ways by making 2 chump blockers, by you also being able to destroy kind of the biggest problem on your opponent's board. And then the 0 mana, sorry, not 0 mana, and the 0 loyalty ability is just a win con for you. This thing is going to be an alt-star, I think, everywhere. I think it's going to see standard play. I think this thing is really crazy, and I actually can't wait to brew with this card. A+s all around. Okay, next up we have Buff Doge Meme, the Fortress Kin Guard, 1 white. It's a 1/2. When this creature enters, it endures. Okay, so it only has 1 endure, so you can choose to make it a 2/3 for 2 mana, which is good, serviceable and limited, or make another 1/1 white creature spirit token. I think this is going to be kind of filler-esque. It's a 2-drop, which will be just kind of good. I think it's a solid C in limited, not really going to see play anywhere else. I like the card. I am not offended by it, so that's good. Don't think much else needs to be said. Furious Forebear, 1 white, Spirit Warrior. It's uncommon. It's a 3/1. Whenever this creature you control, whenever a creature you control dies, while this card is in your graveyard, you may pay 1 white. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, so this can be a very annoying card if built in the right Mardu deck in limited. I can also see you kind of making a commander that cares about recursion in mono white with this card if you have really good payoffs. I can see this being a pretty fun card. However, in standard, I don't really see it doing too much. However, this set is going to give us a lot of support for wanting cards to come out of your graveyard. So it's really hard to say the future of this uncommon, but I think you're going to see play in standard sorry, I think you see play in limited. Whether you'll see play in standard is a little bit shakier. Next we have Life Technique. It's an instant spell for 1 and a white. You put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Again, it's flying and indestructible until end of turn. I think this is going to be a solid combat trick to play in your limited decks. It's going to guarantee your creature living no matter what, and it buffs it. It can also give you flying for a lethal attack. I think this is going to be a solid playable and should fill up one of your 7 spell slots that you're putting in your decks. Past that, this card just can't stand up to something like Monstrous Rage, and cards like Take Up the Shield have not really seen standard play at all, so I don't expect this to get into any of the constructed formats. Luxodon Battle Priest. I actually forgot that there were Luxodons in Tarkir. Well, this is a 4 and a white 3/5. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. Okay, so you're going to definitely want these in your Abzan decks. This is a card that's going to break board stalls or help you finally defend against a huge creature. However, this is not going to help you in the air, and I assume there's going to be a good amount of dragons in Tarkir Dragonstorm or just flying creatures in general. We've only seen about 2 in white so far, but I think this is a card that you will need in a grindier deck in limited. Okay, we have another 1-drop in Mardu Devotee, which is a 1 white 1/2 human scout. When this creature enters scry 2, and then it has pay 1 mana to add white, red, or black. Activate only once each turn. Okay, so it can filter for Mardu, which is interesting. This is definitely interesting to see a card like this, because typically in these sets we've seen that the green mana colors have the better fixing, so it's interesting to see a 1-drop that can filter mana into the colors you would need for a Mardu style deck. I think a 1 mana 1/2 that ETBs and scries to is just solid. Like, you'll never really be too mad at playing that on turn 1 or even turn 5, because if you see the top 2 cards are going to be land and you really need more interaction, you can just bottom those cards. So this thing is definitely going to be a solid middle of the road C, and it's just really nice that it helps make your deck a little bit more consistent. It also doesn't ask you to tap any of your creatures like a traditional mana dork would, since you're in colors that really care about your creatures attacking. I will say, however, this does not help you hit your 3rd or 4th land drop. It'll only help filter a land into a color you need. So you're still going to want to play 17 lands in your limited decks no matter what with a card like this, because it is not actively ramping you like a traditional mana dork. Or in the case of the Lord of the Rings set, when we had land cycling for 1 mana, this filter effect is very different and should not determine the amount of lands you play in your decks at all. Next, Osseous Exhale? We're gonna go with Osseous Exhale. 1 and a white instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, you may behold a dragon, which is either choosing a dragon you control or revealing a dragon card in your hand. That reveal or just having a dragon on field will be the additional cost. This will deal 5 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. If a dragon was beheld, you will also gain 2 life. This is definitely just really solid and limited, a good combat trick, a good removal spell. You're gonna want to play. I don't think you'll be too mad playing this card in white at all. From now on, I'm just not going to mention standard at all, and that will be your cue to know that this will not see standard play, because I don't think I need to reiterate it every time. Okay, Poised Practitioner, 2 and a white for a 2/3 human monk with Flurry. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature and scry 1. Okay, what the Flurry text here is indicating that this is going to be in the Jeskai color wedge that cares about casting your second spell per turn. So when constructing these decks, you're going to want to have some cheap spells so that you can always be double spelling on your turn and gaining the benefits. So you're definitely going to have to play a real tempo style deck with this. I think the scry and the +1/+1 is nice, but this is not something that you get for free at all. So you really need to build your deck right if you want to play this as a 23rd card. However, there'll be plenty of decks that this is just going to be an unplayable card. So I'm going to give this kind of like, it's kind of more of a build around C. I don't see it being that good even in the Jeskai decks. I don't think it's going to be a make or break in the Jeskai decks. I think you're going to want to prefer playing cheaper costed cards that help you draw cards rather than playing something like Poised Practitioner. Rally the Monastery, 3 and a white instant speed spell that has a 2 mana cost reduction if you've played any other spell this turn. You have choose 1, create 2 1/1 white monk creature tokens with prowess. Up to 2 target creatures you control each get +2/+2 until end of turn, or destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. This is a super interesting card. I think this is going to be more of a premium spell in the Jeskai decks, and you're definitely going to want to pick these pretty highly. Again, it's instant speed, so you can do it on your opponent's turn. As long as you've cast another spell, it will be cheaper, but you will need to cast one spell in addition to get that reduction on your opponent's turn if you really want the discount. I think it's really good because it can deal with the biggest problem on your opponent's board or help you get lethal if you have some creatures in the air. And if you're really behind and you need chump blockers, you can make monks. So I think this is an all-around really good card. It's going to be a C+ to B, probably a B in the Jeskai decks if it's built right, but this thing's really good. And I'm wondering if this could see some standard play. I think it's going to be really narrow, but I think this card does so much that you wouldn't really mind playing a 1 in a white spell that does all this stuff, because really, I mean, who knows? This might give you a faster clock than Monastery Mentor. All right, Rebellious Strike, 1 in a white, instant. Target creature gets +3/+0 until end of turn, draw a card. Okay, this is going to be good for sure. I think as a combat trick, it's not really going to help save your creatures, but maybe it can deal with one of the worst things on your opponent's board, or it can help you get a little bit more towards lethal damage. The fact that you draw a card, though, is always going to be good in limited. It's always good to replace a card with a card, so you're not going card negative, so you're not having empty hands while your opponent keeps kind of edging ahead. So I think this is definitely going to be solid. I love anytime I see a card that says draw a card in limited. So I'm going to give this one definitely a C+. Okay, we have Riling Dawnbreaker, a 4 in a white, 3/4 flying vigilance dragon. At the beginning of your combat on your turn, another target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and it has Signaling Roar, a 1 in a white sorcery speed spell that says create a 2/2 white soldier creature token, and then shuffle this card back into your library. I think this is a more appropriately tuned version of Adventure, to where you get a cheaper spell, so that this is a card that you can use early and late. It's not a card that sits in your opening hand and then you don't ever get to your 5th mana and then you just lose the game. It gives you the option of having a 2 mana spell. However, it will get shuffled back into your library, so it's kind of like a little roulette to see if you'll ever get the 3/4 side of this dragon. So when you're playing limited, you're going to have to really think hard about what is going to be the more appropriate mode in the right timing, because you can play this 2 mana spell early and still kind of get outvalued and then never draw a bigger creature to help you stabilize, but at least you will have the ability to play a 2-drop. So I think this card is definitely going to be C+-ish territory. It's going to be better than most of the 23rd cards you put in your limited decks. All right, you guys, we have Sage of the Skies. This is a 2 in 1 white, 2/3 flyer with lifelink, and if you've cast any other spell this turn, it will make a copy of itself on cast, which is super interesting. I think this is backbreaking and limited, because on turn 4, if you cast a 1 mana spell and go straight into this thing, you'll have 4 power worth of evasive lifelink. Really hard for your opponents to answer. If they can answer one of them, not the other, you're still going to run away with the game. And because this is basically a really good ETB effect on cast, it gives me some hope that we can see the white Weenies deck come back in standard. Pretty excited about this card. We're seeing that it is being somewhat valued right now in the pre-release around $5 to $7. So very interesting card. I would love to play with this thing. All right, guys, we have Salt Road Pack Beast. This is going to be your bread and butter in limited. It's a 5 in 1 white, 4/3. The spell costs 1 color less to cast for each creature you control, and when it enters, you draw a card. So if you have just 2 creatures on board, for 4 mana, you're already getting a 4/3 that draws you a card, so that's a really good rate. And if you have 3 or 4 creatures, this thing just becomes such insane value. You'll still be able to play another relevant creature past it. You might draw something that you would want to play right after casting this card. This is definitely in the B territory. You're going to want to play as many of these as you can in your go wide strategies. Okay, I think this is like one of the first mythics in our review. We have Smile at Death, a 3 white enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, return up to 2 target creatures with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of those. Okay, let's think about it for a second. This happens at every upkeep. So even if you're getting creatures with 2 power that aren't really going to size up with your opponent's board, even if you're just chump blocking and having to make bad blocks with this, you will get every ETB that those creatures have at the beginning of all of your turns. So you still need to wait another turn for the Summoning Sickness to stop on this card. Your opponent is definitely going to need to finish you off really fast if you get this card, because if you get infinite blocks and then finally play a flyer, you will get ahead. So this is definitely going to be really solid and limited. I think for 5 mana, it's a little bit too much mana to be played in standard Pioneer or Modern. Yeah, this thing is going to be a B in limited. It's going to buy you so much time and give you so much value. And then it's also going to be a really fun card to play in your commander deck. Okay, we have Starry-Eyed Skyrider. It's a 2 in a white, 1/3 flyer. It's a human scout. Whenever this creature attacks another target creature you control, gains flying until end of turn, and attacking tokens you control have flying. I think in limited, this thing is going to be wild. You're going to need to answer it, especially if they've built the Mardu deck correctly and they have a whole bunch of tokens. It could also make a beefy body get flying too and really win the game in that direction as well. And I think card is going to be kind of slept on in Commander. I think this is a super fun card for your tokens deck. Obviously, having a huge army that's evasive and can kill the whole board is super fun. But what we had before this card was basically archetype of imagination, the blue archetype that would give all your creatures flying. If you're in a token-based strategy, you really only care about the tokens, so we check the box there. And you can simultaneously play a Voltron type strategy by giving your commander flyer and then being able to do commander damage evasively as well. I think this is going to be a hit in Commander. I think people will sleep on this card. And hot take, I like this card way more than Draco Genesis. But we'll get on to hating that card later when we talk about red cards. All right, we have Static Snare. It's 4 and a white. This is the latest version of O-Ring effects. However, it has flash and a cost reduction for each attacking creature. So you can attack with all your creatures to make this 1 mana and then deal with the biggest thing on your opponent's board. Or you can play defensively too, because it doesn't care whether you're attacking or your opponents are attacking. I think this is going to be really A+ in limited. It's not a bomb rare by any means, but this is going to be a super premium removal spell that you're going to want to take highly. However, in standard, it is super interesting because we've seen cards like Witchstalker Frenzy be played in the red decks of the format. But if white decks of the format, we'll see if they're going to be priced into using a card like this. I think it's going to be good tempo. You're definitely going to want creatures just to make sure, because this thing is going to be way too costly if you're playing against a control deck in standard, to where you're basically going to want to board these out because you're not getting an efficient exchange anymore. I think this is definitely going to see some standard play for sure, but mark my words, it may not be in this rotation of standard. All right, Stormplane Detainment, 1 and a white. When this enchantment enters, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. Okay, so this is another Banishing Light. It gives you all non-land permanents. So if there's really pesky enchantments like Smile at Death, you can use this against that. So it's still going to be pretty premium in limited. You're still going to want to play them and pick them quite highly, is my prediction. Unfortunately, 3 mana removal is kind of not where you want to be in standard, so I don't think this is going to see much constructed play at all. Okay, at a glance, I'm seeing a lot of keywords that I like. Sun Pearl Kirin, 1 and a white. It's a 2/1 flash and flying. When this creature enters, return up to 1 other target non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. If it was a token, draw a card. Okay, that is very interesting. We've seen Nurturing Pixie doing all kinds of shenanigans in standard. This costs 1 more. It's also a flyer. It already has the 2 power built in, but now instead of giving a +1/+1, you have the potential of drawing a card. Typically, drawing a card is way better. However, if you're bouncing a token back, it is something you just lose. So if you play something like Novice Inspector and you make a clue token, instead of having to pay 2 mana for that clue, you can just pay 2 mana and bounce the clue and basically unlock it and do the same thing for free. I think that's where this will go. Again, I have no idea if this is going to see standard play, but it's going to be really interesting. I love making extra use of resources that 1 mana spells generate, like Novice Inspector. So I think going Novice Inspector into drawing a card is going to be pretty good. It has flying, it has flash. You can even block with something and then bounce it back to your hand if you want to save it for free, and then this thing will basically have pseudo haste. So this is a card that requires a lot of know-how and has like a high skill ceiling. I think in limited it's going to be great, and I think there is a potential for standard play for sure. All right, Teeming Dragonstorm, 3 and a white. We have another enchantment. When it enters, create 2 with 2/2 white soldier creature tokens. When a dragon you control enters, return this enchantment to your owner's hand. Okay, this thing is awesome. This thing is a great build around card in limited. Getting 2 bodies that are 2/2s for 4 mana is just solid. You're definitely going to want it. And the fact that you can repeat this effect, and this is something you can keep generating value off of, is going to be really great in the right deck. There's going to be a difference to where if you play this in just any old deck, it's a one and done ability. Your opponents will eventually be able to deal with your 2/2s. But if this is played in the right deck, your opponent is going to want to use a premium spell against this card, so that you just don't keep making 2/2s over and over again. I think, yeah, build around. It's a very good build around card. There's a chance you can make a standard deck out of this thing, but I think 4 mana repeatable 2/2s will not be enough to get you there in standard. We saw the Esper Monastery Mentor deck really struggling to stay relevant in the format, to the fact that we're just playing Jeskai Oculus instead. So I'm gonna have to, if I had to bet, this is not going to see constructed play. Okay, then we have this damn thing, Tempest Hawk, 2 and a white for a 2/2 flyer. When this thing deals damage, you get to search your library for another card named Tempest Hawk, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle. You can have any number of cards named Tempest Hawk. These cards have historically been pretty bad in Limited. Apparent Hair did not do too much in Foundations Limited. If you made a really great deck with that card, awesome for you. Typically, not the great. You get to draw a very specific card to replace itself, which is another mediocre body. However, if you play Commander and this is your whole personality, is decks that have as many of the named card, I am sorry for you, because it is the same hat trick every time and it is so boring. I'm convinced the only reasons Wizards of the Coast makes these cards is so that you can open a booster pack that has a 15-cent rare and then feel good about a $3 uncommon that is only valued by some of the more annoying people in the community. I'm sorry to you if you enjoyed it. This is probably my only yuck your yum kind of moment I'm going to have in this set review, but there, I said it. Back to real Magic cards. United Battlefront, 3 and a white, sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put up to 2 non-creature, non-land permanent cards with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Okay, at first glance, this looks like Coco, but you can't get creatures. So I'm really skeptical. I think this is going to be kind of bulky. Right now, everything in Dragonstorm is being like overvalued, but like what non-creature, non-land are you getting back from this? Put up to 2 non-creature, non-land permanent, so it's permanent. So you're really only getting enchantments and artifacts with this, but like what are you playing 2 enchantment or artifacts that you're really gonna want on the field at the same time? Like right now I'm thinking about the removal spell. Like this is cool in Limited because it helps you look for like those O-ring style effects that we just saw. But in Constructed, I really don't know what you're grabbing that's like relevant for 3 mana that isn't a creature. I struggle to see it, but if you see it, if you've seen other creators, or if you have an idea of how to use United Battlefront in Constructed, please leave me a comment, because this is a very interesting card that seemingly just seems like worse collected company. But hey, maybe there's a play space for it in the current standard. Okay, we have Voice of Victory, 1 and a white, 1/3, mobilize 2, which is whenever this creature attacks, you get to create 2 tapped and attacking 1/1 red warrior creature tokens, and then you sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. Your opponents can't cast spells during your next turn. This is going to be a pretty premium 2-drop in Limited. You should probably take it pretty highly, especially if you're building the Mardu deck that has payoffs for your creatures dying. It can also see some standard play, again, but you're going to need those death payoffs to want to play something like this. However, all anyone is talking about for this card is it being a stacks piece in Commander, which is just a redundant Grand Abolisher. Some people believe it's better because it is a 1/3 body, because you really want this card to stick around. You're not going to be attacking, you never really attack with Grand Abolisher anyway. However, you are incentivized due to the mobilize ability, which I think will be largely irrelevant in Commander. But when I hear people talk about these cards, like, it's a pretty multifaceted card. However, when you talk about in Commander, you're really just thinking about that last line of text. And though, yes, it will probably be pretty helpful for you, it'll help you try winning through other people's counter spells on your turn. But you know, it's a really interesting way to take a card that has so much more text and not really care about it, you know, past that 1 stacks piece ability. I think it's interesting. I think CEDH players are hyping this card a lot. We've seen other cards that kind of do similar things, nowhere near the price tag this is currently getting. So I imagine this is going to come down once people start opening this. I think it's going to be like kind of a bulky rare to some extent, because it's not going to see much play in anything other than Commander, is my prediction for it. Wayspeaker Bodyguard, 3 and a white. It's a 3/4 Orc Monk. When this creature enters, return target non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. And Flurry, whenever you cast your second spell each turn, tap target creature opponent controls. Okay, this is going to be very good in the Jeskai decks. Everything about this is screaming kind of tempo to me. Not only do you get to return something of value back into your hand, but if you do the second spell matters abilities, you get to tap down the most problematic creature your opponent controls and get more damage through. So if you can consistently trigger that Flurry ability 3 or 4 times, you've probably got enough combat damage through to just win the game in Limited. I'm gonna give this is like a pretty high C+ for me, I think, in Limited. Like, this is definitely an above average card. All right, I'm Tristan from Tap It and Sack It, and this has been our first attempt at the honest set review of the white cards in Tarkir Dragonstorm. If you enjoyed the video, as always, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe because we would love to do more of these. We're going to be doing all the cards from Tarkir Dragonstorm now that all the cards have been spoiled. And we will also be playing a whole bunch of Limited 2 on YouTube, on Twitch, so feel free to follow all the accounts in the description below. Go ahead. We have a ton of memes on TikTok, and I just appreciate all y'all for sticking around. I had a lot of fun doing this, and hopefully it can kind of elucidate some of the design thought behind some of these cards and let you know which bulk is kind of cooler or have a new perspective for a lot of these bulky cards, in addition to also finding cards that are going to be useful for your commander decks. But until next time, sayonara, Sac Squad.